Hello, GDC colleagues, and welcome to our session, Inclusive Leadership at Xbox Game Studios, featuring 6 of our top leaders across our Xbox Game Studios teams. I'm your moderator, Fiona Cherbak, part of our talent acquisition team at Xbox Game Studios. Join me in exploring the trials and triumphs of our panel of game industry experts as they share their stories at Xbox Game Studios. Let's start by meeting our panelists. I'd like to kick off with introducing Mary McGuane.
Hi, I'm Mary McGuane, she, her pronouns. I'm studio manager at Xbox Game Studios, working with Double Fine, Obsidian, and InXile Entertainment. I've been in the games and tech industry for over 20 years. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you, Mary. Helen, tell us about you.
I'm Helen Chiang, head of Mojang Studios, the studio that makes Minecraft, and I use she, her pronouns. I've spent the last 15 years of my career at Xbox and about half of that time at Mojang, and it's really awesome to be on a panel with this amazing group. I entered the games industry by luck, but I stayed in the industry because of the people, including great leaders like the ones you see on this panel, some of whom I've looked up to for many, many years.
Thank you, Helen. Bonnie, tell us about you.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Ross. I'm the head of 343 Industries, which is the studio that runs all things Halo. So our TV show, our games, our consumer products, esports. I use she, her pronouns, and I've been in the industry for over 28 years, and it's really great to be here today.
Thank you, Bonnie. Would love to hear from you, Kate.
Hello, I'm Kate Rayner, she, her, head of engineering at the Coalition, one of our Xbox game studios and home of the Gears of War franchise. I've been with Microsoft and Xbox for over 10 years, and I've been in the games industry for over 25 years.
Thank you, Kate. Let's move on to Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim Swift. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Senior Director of Cloud Gaming at Xbox Game Studios Publishing, best known for Flight Sim, Tell Me Why, and Ori, the Will of the Wisps. I've been in the industry for a little over 17 years, mostly in design roles, but at Xbox only really for about 6 months, so I'm the new one here. But I'm really excited to be here working with cutting-edge cloud technology.
Thank you, Kim. And Shannon.
Hello, my name is Shannon Loftis, and I am the outgoing studio head for the World's Edge Studio, responsible for all things related to Age of Empires and Age of Mythology, including the recent DE reboots and, of course, Age of Empires 4 and everything to come. I called myself outgoing because after 29 years at Microsoft, most of those, vast majority in games, I recently announced that I will be stepping down to spend a little more time with family, travel, and of course, playing games. So excited to be here on this panel, and honestly, that entire career might have been a lot shorter if not for some of the wonderful people on this group.
Thank you so much, Shannon, and good luck. Very pleased to kick off our discussion today talking about these special journeys that each of you have had. I would love to start with Mary and learn a little bit more about what you might consider to be perhaps the most important part of your professional journey while working at Xbox Game Studios.
Yeah, thanks. I think the opportunity to be the chief of staff for Xbox Game Studios, working with the head of studios, Matt Booty, gave me this great opportunity to really learn a lot about game development and managing over 15 game studios. You know, and during this time, I got to work on the acquisition of 6 independent game studios who became a part of Xbox Game Studios. And I got to be in the room where it happened, as it were, right? And so I became really invested in these studios and their success in coming into Xbox Game Studios and learning, you know, about them, why we acquired them, and how we could bring them into Microsoft and still keep that thing that we bought them for really protected and special, which led me to my current role, which is actually working with 3 of those studios.
Great response, Mary. Thank you so much. I'd like to continue with that question with Kate Rayner.
Thanks, Fiona. As a technologist and technical leader, throughout my career, I've had a lot of highs working with amazing teams to innovate and bring new experiences to gamers. At Xbox Studios, the most important part of my professional journey was being able to bring my full self to work as a transgender woman. There were a lot of factors involved in getting to the point where I was ready to share my truth. Over the last decade at Microsoft and Xbox, I've seen a lot of positive cultural change. The values and the signaling I was seeing in terms of support of women and the LGBTQIA plus community made me feel like this was a place as I could hope to find to come out. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was the impact that my visibility would have on others through the messages that they sent me, and the opportunity in my role in leadership to have a different kind of impact beyond technical accomplishments, which I'm really only starting to lean into.
Kate, that's an inspiring story. Thank you. Bonnie Ross, would love to hear your perspective on your professional journey at Xbox today.
Yeah, great stories by Kate and Mary. I would say, kind of leaning into what Kate said, I tried to think of moments that were really meaningful to me during my career, or were good learning moments. And I would say the first one would be being the first female studio head. At the time, I think that was back in about '99. And it was a good growth point for me because it was defining a lot of things, not just for me, but for others going forward. I was very grateful when Shannon joined, as it was lonely for a while. But I really think that navigating that and having that experience was really foundational to my growth. And then I think the second one would be getting the keys to the Halo franchise. And the two kind of go together, because one of the things that I think that a lot of women, people of color, don't do as much as we don't ask for what we want. And with Halo, originally, there were some different plans when we were going to amicably spin Bungie out. And I was passionate. And at the time, I was running production for everyone at that time. For all of the games that we had, I was head of production. And we were making a decision to organize differently. And Halo was not, my name wasn't sitting on Halo, but it's what I was passionate about. And I put together a presentation and a plan and asked for what I wanted. And, you know, part of it's luck, part of it's experience, but if I wouldn't have asked, I wouldn't be here today. And so I would say that that's really important for us, that remembering to, you're incredibly talented. We want you in the industry, and like ask for what you want and think about where you want to take the industry going forward.
Bonnie, great advice. Thank you so much. These are wonderful stories. I think we want to go a little bit deeper and talk more about individually your approaches to building and running teams and how that's changed since you started in the game industry. I'd love to direct that question to Helen to start.
Thanks, Fiona. I think the biggest change for me personally was when I had my two girls, and that's when I really started thinking about the kind of change that I want to see in the industry before they join the workforce. You want them to grow up believing that they can be anything that they want to be, and not feel limited because they are female. And now, as a leader of a studio, you know, I feel a responsibility to create the change that we want to see in our industry and advocate for the things that are important to different communities and to different team members. And, you know, one of the things that our employees care a lot about right now is more flexibility at work. One of the silver linings from the pandemic is that we were all forced to prove out that we could successfully work remotely. And I don't know if that's somewhere our industry would have gotten on, you know, to on its own without the pandemic, but it's changed us for the better. It's given us the freedom to hire talent living in communities anywhere around the world. It's helped us be more inclusive of different work styles, allowing us to include more people in our meetings and to hear more voices through the chat instead of just one voice in the room. And I'm also really hopeful that our ongoing commitment to flexible work makes it possible for more parents and caregivers to join or even rejoin the workforce in gaming.
Thank you so much. We are learning so much today, and I want to definitely continue with that same question and ask Kim, you know, what has evolved for you? Again, being our newest member of Xbox Game Studios, but in that 6 months you've been here, and in your past, you know, what has been that evolution in building teams?
Yeah, so I started in the game industry as a manager when I was really young. Like I was 21. I didn't really know what the heck I was doing. I'll be perfectly honest. And I would say at that time, in taking direction from others, like the mandate for building teams was just hire the absolute most qualified. But this, obviously wasn't taking into account inherent biases based on the majority demographic of the industry at the time. And so what I've really sort of seen change for the better, in my opinion, is overall the attitude of calling out and recognizing that there is implicit bias, and that though personally I've always secretly strived to hire diverse teams. Overall, seeing this topic being more prevalent in our discourse around the game industry is really encouraging to me, and where it was previously a secret for me of like, oh, it's my little secret to hire a diverse team and get more women and people of color. I feel like now, particularly being here at Xbox, I'm in a place where I can explicitly call it out as a priority, and it doesn't need to be something that is this personal secret.
What a great point and a very strong evolution. I would like to posit this same question to Shannon.
Thanks, Fiona. I mean, so many good thoughts so far, and I'm struggling to make sure that I add value and don't just repeat the wisdom that you've already heard. I guess the other point of view I would add is that as with any personal relationship, what you put into your team building and team relationships is what you get back out. And so it's very much about leading the kind of team that you want to build. If you want an inclusive team that centers on respect, then that's what you have to give to the people that work for you. And not leading that, you might see that start to show up both in the way people interact with each other and ultimately maybe even in your products. One of the things, respect has always been kind of front and center for me as a personal value. I like people to feel respected by me, and I like, in turn, I benefit greatly from feeling like I am respected. And with the World's Edge team in particular, it manifested to the extent that when we decided we were going to represent cultures in our games that were not part of our team, we did a lot of research, and not just Wikipedia, talking to professors or even like reading up on the internet. We actually went and met with representatives of those cultures. We gave them a seat at the design table, and they signed off on how they showed up in the game. And so and that all just came from the fact that, like, for me to feel disrespected is to shut down my creative voice. And I think you can take almost any personal value and reflect it that way. If you behave that way in your personal interactions, you're going to see it come out in your products. And a lot of the time, that's what your gamers want too.
Would love to point out that our three panelists just talked a little bit about diverse teams, inclusivity, and possible bias. I'd like to go a bit deeper into that topic and ask the rest of our panel to explore with us the challenges that they have experienced in building diverse teams. I would like to kick off with Bonnie.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm hoping others will hit on a deeper level. I'm going to start from the top with is just like getting talent. And I think specifically the funnel for senior level talent, so senior diverse talent, is so challenging to find, and we're all trying to land the same people. I feel like we're starting to get better funnels with early in career, with college, which is great that's doing better. But then I would say another challenge is when we bring younger talent in that are early in career, hopefully we're able to create an inclusive environment where they're not an only and there are other people that are like them. But when they look up, we have sort of this concept that I think is well known in the industry where we're just kind of missing some rungs of the ladder, which means that we've got some senior people and then we've got junior people, and it's really people want to be able to see where they can go. And I think that really across the industry, making sure that we have that senior and mid-level talent and that we're spending the time to grow that talent such that others look and can see a path for them to climb to the top is critically important. So I would just say that those are some of the challenges that I think are, one, getting senior the funnel, and then two, making sure that we can show that at all levels you can be successful as a diverse person. And I'm hoping others will kind of talk about what we can do to create an inclusive environment, but I would just say just getting talent in is a challenge.
Yeah. Thank you, Bonnie. Kate, would love to hear your perspective on challenges in building diverse teams.
I think familiarity bias is one of the greatest obstacles to building more diverse teams. This is a known phenomenon where humans tend to prefer options that are more familiar to us. So this can result in a bit of an echo chamber in terms of hiring individuals that are more similar rather than growing diversity within a team. So we need to be aware of this bias, even when it's unconscious. And we've approached this by ensuring we have more diverse interviewers within our loops, ensuring we're reaching out to find the diverse talent that is out there and getting those candidates to the table to have more equitable representation to choose from when hiring to fill our roles. Bonnie mentioned just how important it is to grow more diverse leadership. I fully agree with that. Really having diverse leaders ensures that we're having more balanced and informed conversations naturally at the leadership level. The challenge here, just as important as hiring, is growing those diverse leaders and investing in mid-level career through mentoring and providing equitable opportunities to grow individuals into more senior levels.
Kate, great ideas. Thank you so much. I would love to hear more from Kim in terms of those same challenges that you've experienced building diverse teams.
Yeah, I mean, to echo some of the things that both Bonnie and Kate mentioned, one of our challenges goes beyond recruitment, which is like, how do we maintain and retain the folks that represent our diverse talent and help them grow in their career? I think luckily part of the equation kind of exists within this group, and having a slate of more diverse leadership, not only being able to model what is achievable, but also, asking ourselves what we can do on a day-to-day basis to make things better. And as the way that I see it, at least personally, is that, as a manager and as a leader, I can tap into my own lived experience to try and figure out how to make things better for others and pave the way so that way folks don't have to go over the same speed bumps that I did in my career. And so I'm trying to be really proactive in finding new ways to make diverse talent happy, help them stay here for the long term, make them feel comfortable, and find opportunities for them to make really meaningful contributions that, they can put on their, review at the end of the year, and we can get them promotions.
Great ideas, Kim. Much appreciated. We've talked a little bit about the challenges and even touched on a few solutions when it comes to building diverse teams. I'd like to ask Mary about her thoughts on specific solutions when it comes to building diverse teams in the game industry.
Yeah, it's loving the conversation today, the ideas and the solutions and where we're seeing the barriers, right, to getting a job in the games industry. And one of the barriers that we've seen is just a really rigid set of requirements in order to get a job. And there are some jobs, let's be clear, where there are a rigid set, right? But we should be very intentional when we're hiring what we're really looking for in each of these roles, right? And understanding if something's a nice to have or a have to have. And one of the things we've been doing in partnership with Global Talent Acquisition is really thinking about screening in talent. We're kind of flipping some things on the head. Instead of screening people out and saying, oh, they don't meet X, Y, and Z, to really look beyond the resume and say, gosh, what skills did they acquire in these jobs? What abilities do they have? What background do they have that we don't have on our team? The other thing that was a big barrier in the past and something that we really keep our eyes on is in the interview feedback. We would see this person isn't a cultural fit. And that is, one, very subjective, and two, can be filled with unconscious bias, right? And again, we've taken an approach to flip that on its head and said, is this person a culture add? Are they additive to the culture that we want to have here in Xbox Game Studios and the one that we want to build? And so I like that the energy is really going into something that's more expansive and more abundant than something that's very narrow and rigid.
Mary, thank you so much. I would love to hear Helen's perspective as well on solutions when it comes to building diverse teams.
Really great points, Mary. Someone much smarter than me came up with the idea that diversity is like being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance at the party. That's kind of the approach that we've taken at Mojang, is really focusing on creating a culture of inclusion and ensuring that every team member feels a sense of belonging and connection and community inside the studio. And that creating that culture is a top priority for everyone in the studio, not just our leadership team, not just the members of underrepresented groups that volunteer their time in our employee resource groups. It's a responsibility of every manager and every team member. And what does that look like day to day? It means creating space in meetings where anyone can voice their opinion, and especially when people disagree. It means supporting our managers as they learn how to grow employees of all different backgrounds. It means we're willing to say something when someone isn't using the most inclusive behaviors, so that we can all have a learning moment instead of brushing that off to the side and pretending that it didn't happen. In my experience, finding and attracting the diverse talent isn't the hardest part to building a diverse team. But like Kim said, keeping your talent engaged and retained is often the hardest part. It means fostering an inclusive environment that everyone can thrive in, one that, every one of your team members, their lived experience matches the principles that you talk about. That's the hardest part.
Helen, those are excellent suggestions. Thank you so much. I would love to hear some more also on possible solutions to building diverse teams from Shannon.
So totally additive to all the wisdom that we've already heard from Helen and from Mary. Just commit yourself to learning. I think that there is no human being walking the earth today that is perfectly inclusive and that has never either intentionally or unintentionally uttered or done something that it was uninclusive. And it's really about being receptive to hearing when you've crossed a line, and studying pop culture, studying kind of social trends and social thinking, and incorporating the learnings of society as a whole and the learnings of people in your group that are different than you, who are willing to teach you, into your day-to-day behaviors. Just keep your mind open.
Thank you, Shannon. You and Helen have both touched on the idea of culture, and I'd like to dig into that a little more with both of you. Before we come back to both of you, I'd like to ask Kate about that. When we talk about what Helen and Shannon have mentioned when it comes to culture, what do you do as a leader to really promote that idea or work towards a stronger culture, Kate?
I think, working on culture as part of your leadership priority is something that you constantly need to work at. It's not something that you just check off and get done and sort of move on with other areas. You really need to discuss at the leadership level and identify what are your values as a studio, and have an honest introspection of, do you embody those values that you espouse to have? Culture is not also defined by the top down. You need to listen to the diverse voices within your team to gain perspective from the lived experience that you don't have from others that are not like you. Then talk with your team, share those views, and speak to where your culture needs to improve. Define goals and actions that you can take on with your team to evolve the culture. It's really important as you're growing your team and hiring new individuals onto your team that looking at values and culture, and do those individuals represent that as part of the interviewing process, is just as important as technical skills.
Thank you, Kate. Shannon, what would you like to add in terms of building that stronger culture? What would you recommend?
I mean, I think Kate hit on some super key points of just being explicit, loud and proud about what you want your culture to stand for and what values are going to drive your cultural decision making. And then I think you also need to, frankly, put the money where the behavior is and value culture and cultural contributions as much as you value any kind of technical contribution. There's an old saying that says culture eats strategy for lunch. And I think it's super important to incorporate culture as a critical business component.
Thank you, Shannon. And Helen, you mentioned culture earlier. We know that this is very important topic close to your heart. I would love to know more about your thoughts on what it takes to build and drive that stronger culture in a studio.
Yeah, Kate and Shannon had some really great thoughts. I would just add that, like Shannon said, I think you have to dedicate time to it. Every now and then I'll run into somebody on the team who'll say, hey, this diversity and inclusion stuff, that's not my real work. I want to focus on my day job. And we get to remind them that, yes, creating this culture of inclusion is part of the day job. It's everyone's responsibility. As leaders, it means that as we have these trainings, we need to show up, we need to participate. But also building off of what Shannon said, I think the most important thing we can do as leaders is to show our own learning journey. And, when we make mistakes, recognizing that not everybody is perfect. Sometimes we're going to put our foot in our mouth and not say something in the best way, or sometimes we're going to see some behaviors that we know aren't right, and we don't say anything. Our teams see all of these things and adjust their behaviors based on that. So it's really important that when we make mistakes, that we own them, that we talk about our learning, and that we do our best the next time.
Helen, great response. Thank you so much. I'd like to move on to talk about something a little bit beyond what we've been talking about, which is our employees themselves and the employee communities. Would love to get perspective, starting with Mary, talking about how do you feel employee communities can impact how we build game teams and developing that more welcoming culture in our studios?
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to echo a little bit of what both Kate and Helen had said. But first, I think these communities are so important for the sense of belonging for the employees themselves, right? I know when I first started working at Xbox almost 20 years ago, women in gaming was a small group, right? And now it's happily a very large group, right? But when there's few numbers, it is so critical on the individual level to find people to connect with and have that sense of belonging. So if that's all that the community groups did, great, right? But they go beyond that, and they really do impact our culture, right? So what both Kate and Helen had said is, they keep us honest. And when we talk about our culture, does our culture extend to all groups? Do they feel it in the way that we say it should be, here in Xbox Game Studios? And, and they're able to give us feedback on what we could do to make a more inclusive environment, what maybe we're not getting right, what we could do more of, less of, that sort of thing. There's several current exec sponsors and former exec sponsors of the community group on this call right now. And, we are able to elevate that voice, right? We are able to incorporate and use that as information for planning, for, anything that we would want to do in the studios, that we can bring those voices to bear in rooms that they don't get to be in, right? Yet. And I'm hoping it's a yet, right? And so being able to bridge that. And it's incredibly helpful. And I see in our day-to-day that it's, that the people on this call actually are able to elevate those voices, able to speak for the people who may not be in the rooms in order to really make this inclusive.
Thank you, Mary. I would very much love to hear perspective from Kate on our employee communities.
It's really important to foster an environment where individuals with different lived experiences can share their voice and help us build a stronger culture of inclusion. Communities are a resource that studio leadership should listen to get diverse perspectives on evolving the culture within the team and developing a more welcoming community. I think it's also worth calling out that diverse teams make better products. It's important that game developers work with the diverse communities within them to ensure the cultures and identities they hope to represent within their games are authentic and developed with voices from those communities versus trying to represent a group whose experiences are not their own, or creating experiences that are centered only by the worldview of the game's creators. Game studios, that are getting it more often, have diverse hiring practices and include those diverse employee groups in the design and internal feedback process of making their games.
Kate, thank you so much for those observations. Kim, it would be great to get your perspective as well when it comes to employee communities and our building of teams.
For sure. Yeah. So, obviously, if there's anything we can take away from, what everyone has said, is that overall representation matters, right? And I think, internally, to echo what Mary was saying, it's really comforting to know that, anybody from a diverse group coming to Xbox knows that they have a cohort. I can't tell you how many times I've been the only woman on a team or in a meeting throughout my career, and I'm sure many of you folks have felt the same way. And so knowing that there's others that will understand you and your perspective is really important. And then additionally, kind of tying this back into what Shannon said in a previous question, I think having these groups available helps us build games that are more representative and diverse. So for example, in our organization in publishing, it's a priority to make sure that we're representing folks of different backgrounds very respectfully, and that being able to actually make sure if we don't have that particular type of folk like represented on our team, that we can actually go through organizations across Xbox like our ERGs or Games for Everyone, and put together advisory panels. And I know that's something that I'm really looking forward to being able to tap into with the titles that we're working on in publishing.
Kim, terrific suggestions. Thank you so much. We've had a great conversation today, and to help us wrap up, we're going to talk a little bit about what we might recommend to other game studio leadership, whether that's in the industry or even at our own company. I'd like to kick off with Helen talking a little bit about what are your lessons learned that you would recommend or pass on to future studio leaders.
Thanks, Fiona. I think the main thing I've learned is how important it is to be willing to be part of the solution. Earlier in my career, I was convinced that, just pointing out the problems was enough, that there was someone else who was magically going to take the baton and go solve all of those problems that I pointed out. And what I've learned is that if we want to see change, we have to be willing to challenge the status quo and have the courage to disrupt, some of our existing systems. And that means being willing to speak up when you're not always in the majority. It's really hard to be a change agent, but we need more change agents if we want to see change.
Thank you, Helen. Shannon, with your lengthy career background, we're sure you have some great lessons you've learned along the way that you want to share.
Sure. I mean, it's really all about the people. Make your network, bring your network along with you. The people that you're working alongside of today might be your best mentors or your peers or your support network or your boss in the future. And so build and sustain that network in a super sustainable and a super mindful way. In the games industry, it is all about the people, and studio manager is the best job you can possibly have. And so just make it about working with the people that you love, making games that you love.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shannon. And Bonnie, to conclude our session today, we definitely want to hear your perspective on lessons you feel you've learned that you would choose to pass on.
Yeah, I think that as Shannon said, it is all about the people. And, my thoughts would be, all of us came up, like Helen, Shannon and I probably more similar, but came up through different functions. And when you get to the point where you're a studio manager, you're looking, I would say, like, make sure you know your strengths, but more importantly, make sure you know your weaknesses, and then hire around your weaknesses and make sure that you're hiring strong leads that are strong in areas that you aren't. I think your leadership team, really think about it, because that's where you establish, like, talent. Top talent attracts top talent. Diversity attracts diversity. So as you're thinking and putting together your leadership team, really think about, like, what do you want your studio to look like? And it all starts as, really about the people and the leaders that you choose to help lead and recruit and drive what your vision and culture is. So again, it's about the people. And, I think that that's obviously one of the most rewarding parts about being a studio leader, is actually being able to empower a team to create great experiences. But again, it is the talent, and the people are the most important thing.
Bonnie, great guidance. Thank you so much. This has been a terrific session today. What an excellent group of game industry leaders. We're very fortunate and proud of our inclusive leadership at Xbox Game Studios. Thank you for joining our Game Developers Conference session.